How do you know your God is the real God, or that there is only one God with so many different religions and different beliefs and different people talking about potentially different gods, or believing in different gods? How do you know that your God is the real God and that he's the only God, or some iteration of this question? And it comes up a lot. When I get a question like this, of course, I'm always going to start with the paradigm in my head. I'm really trying to understand what people are really trying to ask and what they're really trying to get from here. So, for the sake of the question is assuming a factual statement that God is who he is, it's who he says he is, and that he is the only one. Now, the question could also come up in that same piece of the paradigm of, could there be more than one God? In this case, we're going to state that obviously there is only one God, but it does depend on your worldview. There are other religions that are polytheistic that have multiple gods, that this is just another God, where God is very clear that he is the one and only and he does not share. So, for the sake of a paradigm of the question, we have to make sure we're answering it in that way, that God is asserting and proving that he supersedes all others, and not even in a fact that there might be other gods, but just in case somebody thought that way, even in that situation, he would be above them. Otherwise, we do end up in an answer of, well, couldn't God just fit in with this other thing or these other ideas or these other, so, quote unquote, small g gods? Um, One thing that I do like to play with, again, just to kind of set the paradigm a bit for the conversation, is I'll ask if they've ever asked anybody from another world review or religion that question. And I'm curious what the answer is. And usually they haven't. And even if they have, the question was never really overly answered. And that's been my experience. When I've asked people of other beliefs and faith that question, there's not really an answer there. And that's okay. I'm just always kind of curious. And the reason I do that is it stops us from kind of crisscrossing in and out of a God view, a different paradigm, multi-religional conversation that you can't really get anywhere with. So it's the only reason I'm doing it. I'm not trying to stump them or anything like that. I'm just curious and genuinely want to know. Anecdotal, couple of big things that I want to hit on. One of the biggest ways that I can prove that is the historical proof, right? The fact that not only does God, the Bible, and everything else in religion continue to be true and proven true over and over again throughout history. Now, just because I'm saying that does not mean that there haven't been Christians that have done bad things or people claiming to have done a thing in God's name that clearly goes against it. I'm talking about what God says about himself, for his people, for us to follow. Not that everybody always pulls it off perfectly. That idea of, liking Jesus, but not necessarily the Jesus followers at times, which of course we are flawed and have our own um, opportunities to grow in the Lord. But God is perfect. But just that continual proof that it continues to be true. Now, another one anecdotally, and it was really interesting as I was kind of talking to some folks around this before I did the recording. This was the one that came up more and more, is testimony. So many people have unbelievable testimonies. And I love that. But in a conversation like this, using testimony is a fantastic idea. However, testimony does require faith. It does require us to accept the story. We've all heard crazy stories from people before where I don't doubt that they really believe that what they saw or went through was a real thing, but it doesn't align to anything. This kinds of stories of testimonies that are just mind-boggling to me, that I absolutely love, is when you hear the testimonies of somebody who was in a country that there's no way they knew anything about God, and Jesus continues to appear to them in a dream or some iteration of that. There's a ton of those testimonies that are incredibly powerful, and I don't want to degrade them in any way by trying to be very specific, but there's a lot of those types of testimonies. And hey, turns out when they actually meet up with Christians that are Bible studying Christians, it's all the same stuff. Same true answer, no connection. I love those types of stories. So testimony, though powerful, I never want to hang the whole answer on that in this situation, because I could use my own testimony, right? Saul's conversion to Paul, of course, it was the final nail in the coffin for me, where I no longer could argue against Christianity. That was my turning point in my own salvation. The fact that it is the oldest active religion, and I know that will ruffle feathers, and somebody's going to have it technically and actually. Look, here's the thing: as far as we're concerned, from the beginning of time, God has always been true and has always been here, and He's always revealed Himself. That is one of the key things to me in this type of situation. Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the evening, right? Go back to the early parts of Genesis if you're not familiar with that from the beginning. A lot of times, other religions, though they may have a similar type of story, they frequently, um, you know, were hidden from that to a degree or for a certain period of time. But, you know, Christianity, if I'm going back through all of the roots and including, the old, what we know as the Old Testament, right? We're going back over 4,000 years, talking 1800 BC. And of course, there's always going to be a new dig that pulls up another piece of parchment or something like that. The other religions that I could find, the next closest one was, 14, maybe 1500 BC. But again, the fact that it's always been there, and more importantly, the fact of the unity of that, the story has not changed. And I know, like for me, many other Christians, that the fact that it doesn't change is actually one of the biggest things that gives me comfort, that I can trust God to be who He says He is today, tomorrow, and yesterday. And I love that. But it also does prove that the word hasn't been modified at all, it doesn't get changed or go through iterations. And that is one of the biggest things with it. The biblical accuracy, we did a whole video on that as well, which kind of plays into that same idea. But the actual Bible accuracy is one of the big reasons, anecdotally, that I'll always look into this. No contradictions. And I know that also can get a lot of people kind of riled up and, oh, there's contradictions, the Bible's filled with them. Again, we might end up doing an entire session on that one. I find that quite intriguing. Typically, in talking with folks around contradictions in the Bible, or even when I've come across what I thought were contradictions in the Bible, what I have always come to find in my own personal exploration of chasing truth, which those of you that know me know that's more than anything what I pursue until I was saved, but I still chase that truth. I believe that is a massive part of our faith. Was just I was missing a piece of the puzzle. I didn't have to bend or kind of twist my mind to make it work so I could. No, I just didn't understand two pieces or understand that what was being reported in history of the Bible was not actually what God had commanded, but what people did. And it's just historical fact at that point. Or that, again, I just didn't have a full piece of the puzzle. And once that was added in, okay, everything kind of came together. So we might do a whole breakdown on that at another time. And then, of course, just the countless times God proves Himself to be real, not only throughout history, but in our own lives, in everybody else's lives as they come through that. Now, anecdotal is great. I want to get into scripture here and hit on a couple of them. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And yes, I'm going back to Genesis 1:1 again. I love this verse. God opened up with a banger. This thing could go on and on and on forever. He is making a truth claim, a statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if he's writing this from the first person, right, that I factor almost there, right? Everything. I've got it all. He's stating that outright to begin the conversation. Moves on a little bit later on, first two commandments of the 10 commandments in the Old Testament. And I'm summarizing here, right? But you'll have no other gods before me and have no idols before me. He's not only hitting on these points, but he is claiming supremacy. He's proving supremacy. And he is saying, you will not have anything else before me because only I am God. In those generalizations, I'll go read those first two commandments. If you're not familiar with them, I'll put them in the description or here on the screen. Next one, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but go with me here. And I like this because of the contrast. And that is actually one of the stories from Elijah in the Bible here in First Kings, where, and I'm going to summarize a large story again. Go check out the references here if you're not familiar with it. But in over summarization, basically him and the false god Baal and his prophets are going at it. And it was just Elijah. He's talking about being the only one left. And there's 450 or something like that of the Baal prophets, so to speak. And Elijah basically goes, hey, I tell you what, go get two bulls. You guys make it up on your altar, do your sacrifice, do whatever. And I'll do the same. and let's call down fire. Get your God to call down fire, consume everything. And they try it, and of course nothing works. It's not a real God. This is what happens. Um, there's no evidence of it. And he even starts to kind of tease them a little bit. Maybe it's far away, whatever. And they do all their stuff, and finally it's not going to happen. And so now it's Elijah's turn, and obviously he's not testing the Lord here. Please, nobody misread into that. This was obviously something that he had in communion with God to do, and decides, he's gonna do it. Now, not only does he get it all prepared and go to offer it up on the altar here, but he has them just absolutely drench it, I think 3 times, right? Make sure that there's no possible way this thing could have accidentally be lit or anything like that. Um, Simple prayer to the Lord, and the Lord consumes literally everything. And the details in the verses there are amazing about just how much he consumed. It just literally consumed everything, even though it was soaking wet. And I love that, because when other low G gods here can't prove themselves, the God will. Not in a testing. A lot of times that idea of, ooh, strike me down, or, bolt of lightning or whatever. No. This was obviously in God showing his power in this, but he does do that many times. Moving on a little bit later, Doubting Thomas. Again, I always feel so bad for Doubting Thomas here for being analytical and being a skeptic and not just falling into what everybody else was seeing after Christ rose. And again, adding into that, Jesus ascending himself. These 2 passages in particular are more than anything what gives to that proof, right? You got John 20 and then Acts 1, 6 through 11 in these 2 different stories. But Jesus not only comes back, raises, and shows himself to at least 500 people. A lot of us think that count was even higher based on understanding some historical stuff and how they counted. But again, 500 people, not 10, not 1, not 50, 500 people over 40 days, and is showing himself. And then, Thomas, not until I see him, not until I see this. And he goes, here, put your hand in the hole, in the side, in my scars, in my wounds. Jesus couldn't have had a brother that looked a lot like him. It's nothing like that. He literally, this is me. And he shows him that, a one-off reference there. And then actually seeing him ascend into the heavens again is one of the best pieces that I love to argue as well when we're talking about how do we know that Jesus really, how do we know that he didn't just survive the crucifixion, which obviously there's no way you could have, but then we actually see him ascend, right? Not just live on to an old age. So a couple of different pieces in here. There's a lot of ways to attack this. I do love the testimony aspect of it, as I was mentioning earlier, but I want to back it up with some scripture. There's some, I think, more targeted scripture that you can get into around this topic, especially with God, proving himself, not that he needs to, the points of I am, all these different pieces that you can really get into. These are some of the ones that I've used in the past in these conversations, and never really had anybody really refute it. Now, they may not still believe in God, but they're not going to deny that if there was a God, that was who it would be. And that's always my hope, right? I want to show you God so that you have the ability to have the same faith and joy and peace and mercy and everything in him. And that's why I want you to do this. That's why I'm doing it. So thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.